do Q&A. Do you want to
Question for you. I had a primary care physician that was pretty awesome, and then the office was acquired by a hospital. And then it turned into I would go in for my physical and be asked if I had any firearms in my home. So have you noticed a correlation? And I said, of course I don't have a gun in my home. Are you crazy? So have you noticed a correlation between hospital acquisitions and that kind of deviation from actual medical care?
It's something that doctors discuss a lot because there's much more the case that hospitals or big practices are buying up the smaller fish. And when they do that, they get to impose their policies and procedures, hospitals especially. And they sometimes have to have, some of these aren't required by law, but they feel that they ought to. And it is true that the doctor loses a lot of flexibility. They have to do what, otherwise they lose their employment contract. They may be out the door the next year. And I personally think it's a bad thing. And the problem with the current health law is that it tilts the playing field very heavily in favor of these acquisitions because it makes it much harder for the smaller 6-person practices to survive because they have to buy their own medical record, electronic medical record system. It's very expensive. It's one thing to divide the cost between 6 doctors versus like 600 doctors, right? So the answer is, and it's not that employed doctors are bad, but there's the chance that they are not completely their own masters. They are obliged to follow the policies of their employers, which may be good or may not be. And you're you just actually hired another person to be sort of like the third person in the room with you and your doctor. And he may be someone that's fine, and maybe someone who's not so good. So that's the short answer to your question.
Thank you for taking my question. Why does it hurt when I... No, but on a serious note, what do you see as a good solution? Because we talk about solutions in like Congress and whatnot for Obamacare and what this action has done. What do you see as a good solution for federal government to implement?
Great question. There's a lot of alternate plans to Obamacare that have been floated over the years. I like the Whole Foods plan by John Mackey, but there's ways of basically changing the tax structure so that you can buy insurance that is truly catastrophic only insurance rather than having a bunch of obligatory benefits that you might not need. When you have that, you can then take the extra money and use it for your own health savings account. You can then pay for the concierge or direct pay doctor with that. And so that basically, it reverts the control of the money to you as much as possible, except in the rare cases where you've got like a horrible illness or horrible accident. And that, he who controls the money controls how medicine is practiced. And if the money is controlled by somebody else, they get to decide what kind of care is considered appropriate or not. If you control the money, then. So the short answer is, a system of laws that eliminate the tax disparity between personally purchased private insurance versus employer-provided insurance would make it so that you could then eliminate some of the insurance mandates, would let you buy true catastrophic insurance, and would probably lead to a booming in the health savings account market. And that's sort of the long answer to this.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. If I recall right, I think Ben Carson also talks about an HSA. Okay. Are you familiar with?
I know who he is. I haven't actually heard much of his specific speeches on those topics, but I know who he is. But it's something that is a very commonly pitched idea, and I actually like him a lot. And I like my own HSA because I get to pick how I spend my money, and it's great.
Hey, Doctor. I was just going to say, Dr. Carson advocates people being assigned an HSA at birth, so then you make kind of the whole situation of pre-existing conditions and portability. I mean, it would be moot essentially at that point because you would go from your parents to your next job to your next job and still have the same insurance.
Right. And ideally, you want to uncouple health insurance from employment. And it's that way only because of these crazy tax laws that started in World War II, which I wrote a whole Forbes piece on. But that's it's common amongst the health economics people that it's a weird system that our health insurance is tied to our jobs in a way that isn't in any other country and no other. Like, you don't get your disability insurance from your job. You don't get your car insurance from your job. It's just crazy how that works. And because of that, there's a whole set of things you can't do in the insurance market because it's linked to your job and you don't have a permanent policy that is your policy that you take with you everywhere. You had a question, Brian?
Yeah, so you mentioned the rating system, and now you've got the federal government coming in and basically mandating the rating system. Obviously, I think the long-term consequences of that are horrible.
Right.
But have you started to see any basically engineering of the questions to basically cost-saving measures as opposed to what might be in the best interest of the patient?
That's it. I've not been looking for that. That's one of the things I probably should, because it'll be a rich fodder of material to write about. I'm sure there'll be some juicy things you can go, wow, can you believe we're now being required to do X or Y or Z? So the answer is no, but I should look out for that.
I have a follow-up on that. So I'm a family practice doc, and I have a couple practices, one in Boulder and one in Broomfield. It's actually a direct primary care.
Oh, good. Excellent.
But
so you may get a lot of people that want to sign up with you.
Right. So I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and shortly after the Affordable Care Act was passed, we started implementing the Bounceback policy.
Oh, yes, yeah.
You know, heart attack or congestive heart failure or COPD, and you were admitted for a serious condition like that, and then ended up coming back before 30 days, then the hospital actually was penalized for that. I think initially 1% and then 2% and higher of their Medicare, like their total Medicare reimbursement. And so you started having doctors seriously start to contemplate, well, here's this really sick person. They had a heart attack 30 days ago. And of course, the likelihood of you having a heart attack within the first 30 days is actually really high.
Right.
And they were actually sitting there kind of contemplating, well, does this person really need to be admitted? I mean, this was a cardiologist that was admitting this in front of a conference. I mean, everybody was like, oh,
so basically, he was thinking there's a perverse incentive to not treat the patient properly.
I can't believe we found ourselves at this point.
Right, okay. That's actually really disturbing, but I'm glad you mentioned that. Anyway.
Right here.
What do you think about like the Kaiser programs, the AARP Advantage programs, as far as healthcare?
I don't know as much about the AARP. I did work at Kaiser for a few years in California before I relocated to Denver. I don't want to go into too many details, especially because this is going to be recorded, but let's say there was a reason. There was a reason I left my job at Kaiser in California, and I'm very happy at my private practice job in Colorado. And the Kaiser model is based on they collect all the money from the people each year, and that's the pot of money they use to take care of you. So if you're a patient and they have to go, well, should we take out your gallbladder or should we try to get by with medications for one more year and see if you can live with pain? They have a powerful incentive to do less as long as it's not true malpractice, because anything more they do just comes out of their pocket. Now, you can also make the argument that doctors in private practice, at least right now, they have maybe a possible bad incentive to do more than you would need. They might try to sell you, oh, we'll take out that gallbladder now, and maybe you didn't need that. So there can be bad incentives in both directions. But having seen both sides, I personally think it's easier to cope with the possible bad incentives of overtreatment than undertreatment, because in undertreatment, you often don't even know what the options are. If your doctor says, I'm sorry, man, here's the medicine, you don't need surgery. Is that true? Or was surgery maybe an option and they just didn't want to offer it to you for some reason that they're not telling you? Whereas if they say, here's surgery and here's medicine and I buy surgery, you can still shop around and say, I didn't quite like how that sounded. Let me see if there's someone else that has a slightly different opinion that makes more sense to you. So I think you have more chance to find the right answer for you in that kind of system than where the doctor has a little bit of a hidden incentive to not offer you the full range of choices. Again, the Kaiser doctors I knew were generally very ethical. They tried hard to do everything right by their patients, but you could see that if the screws were tightened just a little bit more, a certain percentage of them might be a little less willing to buck the system. And there'd be caught between the person who pays their salary and the patient who they're taking care of, because it's not the same person. Does that make sense to you, man?
That would be my assessment.
Yes. Very good. Right.
So I'm actually with Kaiser, and not as an employee, but as a patient. And there's a new doctor there every couple months, and I have to sign up for a new doctor because my old one left or whatever. So do we have doctors leaving wholesale, or are they just leaving this company? Or
I can't answer. I don't know enough about the local Kaiser market. There's a certain amount of turnover, of course, but I just know that that's just proportionate.
A lot of people quitting, not being doctors.
That's something
because of stuff.
Yeah, there's been discussed. A lot of people discuss the coming medical exodus. Doctors basically getting fed up. It hasn't happened yet. I don't know if what you're seeing is the early canary in the coal mine example of that beginning to happen or not. That's a good question, and I should look up that as well.
Could you address malpractice and what your thoughts are as to, how that, whether it should play in, what role it should play in this?
It is definitely true, especially in some areas, that doctors do what's called defensive medicine. Like they'll get the extra scan or the extra X-ray. They do something more than you might really medically need just to CYA in case of a lawsuit. I think that happens a lot in emergency rooms. For instance, if someone bumps their head and maybe they're a little woozy, they might not really need the CAT scan that costs $600, but from the doctor's point of view, if you don't order it and they have like some bleeding and the patient has a really bad event, their butt is on the line. And so it doesn't, and the fact that they saved money for the hospital is the hospital's not going to stand up behind them, afterwards. So there are perverse incentives to having defensive medicine, which does raise the cost of healthcare. From what I can tell, it's important, but it's sort of like one of those second tier things that makes healthcare too expensive in the U.S. And I know people have tried to figure out interesting systems to make it so that you can arbitrate or resolve genuine cases of harm in ways that make so doctors don't overorder, but they still order what and I think it's important. It's one of those sort of tangential issues. It's important, but it's sort of separate from these quality issues of is your doctor good or not. But especially if you're an OB doctor or ER doctor, those people have to do a lot of stuff to protect themselves because the malpractice risk that they work with every day is really high. Betty.
You've given us good advice on finding out if your doctor's good, but I have a question on hospitals. So many hospitals have some kind of religious affiliation, and we've had bad experiences where the religious ideas influence the patient care. Is there a way to find out if hospitals are really tied to the religion, or if they're more of a, treat the patients?
Right. That's I think it mostly comes up in the two areas of end-of-life issues and abortion, contraception, etc. So certain hospitals, basically, you're not going to get an abortion there. And I think for others, like if you just need your appendix taken out, it doesn't make any difference. So I think maybe if it's one of those two issues that you might be worried about, that might be the kind of thing you would just go ask the hospital, is this something that I would be able to get, or is it going to be a problem? And I think especially end of life, I would personally maybe go to one of those non-religious hospitals if I think that my relative or someone we might have to have the discussion about when to end the life support. Go ahead.
I'm thinking of an emergency where you have an accident, so you should probably pre-check out the hospitals in your area and say that if there's a problem, send me to this hospital.
This one rather than that one.
Yeah.
And so I mean, and the problem is sometimes hospitals will be like, they'll have like the name of like some religious saint. But
they'll be sneaky about it.
Right. But yeah, if they have like a religious affiliation, then they usually try to let you know. But the hard part is not knowing, do they take it seriously, or is it just like a legacy holdover from like 50 years ago, but they don't really.
I had an emergency room visit at a hospital near here, and for a year afterwards, I got solicitations in the mail and email to give them money in the name of Jesus. And I actually made a state complaint. Which is something I never do, but I actually made a state complaint against this hospital for their ridiculous solicitation.
Did they mail them or bike them over?
Did they mail them or bike them?
Yeah.
They were delivered by pigeon.
Anyone else who has not yet answered ask the question? Otherwise, I'll go. Okay, then. Actually, Charles, you had it, right? Go ahead. Yeah. Then you'll be next.
Is there any? If you can't answer this, it's fine. I've always wondered why there's not an arcade center of diagnostic equipment for hypochondriacs. That seems like that's a market with Google Doctor that would just kill.
Sort of like you can get your blood pressure at the Walgreens, but you want everything else, right?
Yeah, you can go in, I want to have a blood battery done, I want a CAT scan.
We've covered this, it's called Google. You're always dying. No matter what you study, you're dying.
But my point is, the test instruments are cartelized, they're monopolized. I have to go to one of these institutions to get access to the tools.
Right.
Why aren't those tools available to a broader market?
In some states, there's actually very explicit regulation. Those are called certificates of need. So like even if maybe you're even a doctor's office and you want to get a new CAT scanner, you have to file it through the certificate of need. Colorado is not one of those states, but there are states where that's actually an issue, and places like Institute of Justice are litigating precisely that issue. In Colorado, that's not a problem, but the problem would be, let's say I'm an entrepreneur, I want to offer my CAT scans are us service for people. And some places, there are places in California that kind of do cater these for what they call the worried well. That's and the question is, can you make it financially, are there enough people that will pay out of pocket, because insurance will not pay for this typically, that will fork over $400 and get a scan? Now, for some things, there's these things called the cardiac score heart scans. You just pay $100 out of pocket. They'll scan your heart. They'll see how much calcium you have deposited in your arteries. This is actually scientifically validated, and they can give you a number like you're like 0 and you're awesome, or you're 400 and you're in trouble, or somewhere in between. And they can actually give you something actionable, like you're great, or I think you need to see a cardiologist, or you need to do some diet and exercise. Because that's actually worked out. So there are a few niches of that sort of private pay, but the economics have to work out for the vendor as well as for the patients. And the patients have to want that, which not everyone wants that, right? So there's a couple of complicated issues that feed your question. So the answer is there's a little bit of it, not as much. Yeah, if that answers your question.
I work for an auto liability company, and we handle a lot of auto claims with injuries. And with CPT codes and whatnot, there's a big disparaging number for what hospitals charge for certain items.
Right.
How do some hospitals justify charging people without insurance, or just coming right in, these thousands of dollars over what a CPT code would average?
Right. That's a good question. There's sort of a long answer, a short answer. The short answer is that most people don't actually pay the list price. It's kind of like you go to college. Very few people actually pay the price to go to Harvard, the list price, because there's all these things. And insurance companies often cut deals. They say, well, if you come to this hospital, you don't pay what Swedish hospital charges. You pay this pre-negotiated rate. And so the full list price only goes to a very few people, and the people to whom that gets charged are all people who can't pay anything anyhow. But it's used as negotiation levers for other sorts of things. So that number is kind of it's sort of semi-mythical. But if you're stuck with the number, you're stuck, and that will actually go on your credit report. You owe $200,000 to Hospital X, even though they would actually be willing to cut your deal and say, you just pay 10%, but you call it good. But it's up to you to kind of figure that part out. So, all right. Yeah. Okay.
Paul, thank you for being here. I always enjoy reading your articles. My favorite one to refer to people is your moral health care versus universal health care.
Okay, thank you very much.
To me, is a classic to share with people. That was written a couple years ago, so how relevant is that article today, and how much of it would you have to add or amend to make it in today's world?
I think the part on the history, of course, is still relevant. It would actually need some revamping to take into account all the changes in the laws that have happened since 2007. And every so often, I get the impulse to actually go to the library, do a bunch of online research, rewrite the article, and make it this really kick-ass article, and then I wake up. Okay. So it would need some rework. Definitely. There's someone else that was handled, but I don't.
Oh, no, I was just trying to get.
Oh, okay. All right. Anyone else have a question? Sure, please.
What is your opinion on the Affordable Care Act? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel, or are we going to get rid of it? Or
if so, is it a train this week?
I'm not a fan of the Affordable Care Act, and I've kind of written a bunch of stuff on why I think there's serious. It does double down on many of the worst problems of the pre-Obamacare. But the pre-Obamacare status quo had many serious problems. It was not, I don't want to go back to that, but the Affordable Care Act merely enhances some of the worst features of that, tying people to a kind of screwed up insurance system that isn't yours. As to how to get rid of it, I have things I would love to see take its place, but then to get that put into practice requires a different level of politicking and things that I don't have that much interest in. I know there are a lot of people that are real political junkies out there, and there are definitely many advocacy groups that try to make better ideas get passed in the law. And I like those people who do that. That's a nice division of labor. I'm one of those guys that kind of sits back and does my own writing of interesting things, and hopefully others will just feed, the beast that others will work with and then translate it along. I don't like doing that kind of level of political work, but I think it's important. I just don't know what will happen.
When you talk about catastrophic insurance, so someone or people, if that became very popular or allowed by the government for that matter, it seems like then something else that would be helpful would be able to force or to request physicians to post their prices. So, for example, a strep test. Everybody would know. I can go to my regular doctor and the strep test will cost $100. I can do it at Walgreens for $25. So that then there starts to be some ability to not only get, charge, get the value, but know what you're paying for that value.
I very much agree that there's a lack of what they call price transparency. It's a super duper opaque market. It's very frustrating. And I've often been asked, I can't comparison shop for a CAT scan. I know what it costs in my own radiology group. It's very hard to find out what it costs in other practices and they often don't know. And I think that would naturally come about if you had a more robust consumer market. For instance, if you need LASIK eye surgery, they're telling you all of it. One eye equals $100. One eye surgery. They're getting down. Same is true with these cardiac scans. The transparency happens as a natural outgrowth of consumers controlling their own dollars, because then they're wanting to appeal to you. But when you, the recipient, aren't the one paying, they don't give a damn, because it's actually not. They need to negotiate with the who's paying, and those guys who are paying, they know damn well how much the money is. You don't know, and they don't think you need enough.
I'll give you an example. To find the cost, though, is if you look at these independent imaging facilities, and that's kind of competition there. But if you go to Touchstone Imaging, for example, if we try to submit something for somebody's insurance, an MRI might cost $3,000 or $4,000. But if you go to Touchstone Imaging, they charge you $580. Or an X-ray, $60.
It can be way more efficient than some of these little entrepreneurial.
In one of the hospitals, basically, I talked to the CFO of a major hospital in the area recently, and he said the reason that is because that's our cost. We cost shift to that. That's where we make up the money, because we're staffing the 24-hour trauma surgeons and the ER docs and that kind of thing, and we can't really give you the real price on that. So we shift it over to the radiology, and that's how we make up our money. Well, as a consumer, do I want to try to help out the hospital? I'd kind of like to help out the hospital, but I don't want to pay $3,000 because I have a high deductible. I'll go to a Touchstone Imaging.
Excellent one. Should we just call it? Anyone else? I'll be available just for random discussions, afterwards too. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
That was fantastic. Thank you. We hinted at it, and I don't recall if we actually put it up on the Facebook page, but Paul is a columnist at Forbes, and his column is excellent. So we'll make sure it's posted on the Facebook page so you guys can subscribe to it. But he covers a range of topics relating to healthcare and others, including space travel, if memory serves. Yeah, it was very good. So definitely check him out on Forbes, because he has some very good stuff there.